how cuts on the federal level are impacting Hawaii nonprofits.
We talked to 3 leaders of local nonprofits about how they're faring in the wake of those federal cuts and how the state might be stepping in to help. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suchi and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, aloha, thanks for tuning in here to Spotlight Now. We're going to get to our first guest in just a few moments, but we always like to encourage those of you watching to engage in the conversation by adding your questions and comments into Facebook and by sharing this video on social media as well.
Yeah, thanks for those of you who are engaging with us right now. We want to welcome in our first guest, and that is Michelle Bartel, who is the CEO of AUW. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
AUW, of course, Aloha United Way. You took the helm there at the beginning of the year. Taking the helm at such a pivotal time, how have the last 5 months been for you?
Well, it's been a roller coaster for all of us, really. And with the announcement of the executive orders and the pausing of federal funding that we saw right after the inauguration, we're really hearing a lot of concern from our nonprofit partners. So many of our nonprofit partners were already stretched thin, right? Nonprofits for federal grants, they work on a reimbursement basis. So you can imagine that just the uncertainty over whether or not funding is going to continue really makes it impossible for them to plan. If you are expected to lay out your services before you even are paid, knowing that funding could literally be stopped at any point in time without a moment's notice, it makes it impossible for nonprofits to try and plan ahead. And you can imagine, they have to decide, do I continue to provide these services for vulnerable people when I don't know if I'm actually going to ever get reimbursed for providing these services? It's truly a concern. And we're also hearing concern from residents directly who call our 211 statewide helpline. We're seeing about the same number of calls coming in, which is interesting, but it's a high number, and it's certainly higher than it was pre-pandemic. It's about 3,000 calls or so a month. But what we're seeing that is of concern is a greater number of unmet needs. And so in the areas of rental assistance, utility assistance, we're seeing that there's fewer programs to actually meet the need that's out there. So we're not just tracking what folks are calling about and asking about, we're tracking whether or not there are programs and services that we can refer them to.
And because Aloha United Way works directly with so many nonprofits in our community, you have a unique perspective of getting the lens of not only, as you said, those who are calling 211, but also what the organizations and nonprofits are going through as well. Is there one area that you've seen or an organization or a sector of our community that might be impacted the most right now based on what we're seeing? And we know that there's still a lot of uncertainty from the federal level, but is there any sort of clear indication that this sector is looking to take maybe a tougher brunt compared to others?
Well, so the impact is really very widespread. There's a lot of federal dollars that flow in through either directly or also through state programs. And so it has caused a lot of concern, even in organizations that don't receive federal funding, because they are concerned that private philanthropy will now shift what they're doing. So it's hard to pinpoint and say any one sector has been more hard hit than the others. And right now, a lot of it is still, there's been a lot of pauses. There's just still so much uncertainty that we don't know yet which programs are for sure have been cut. So that's also very challenging in terms of trying to plan and trying to assess where the real needs are. I can tell you that, obviously our folks that are calling 211 are primarily expressing housing insecurity, food insecurity, and need help with utility payments, right? So those continue to be very high concern areas because we know the need is so great. So anytime we see any sort of disruptions to the funding stream, it really impacts the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, in Hawaii, we have such a high cost of living, and so it's easy to see how someone could fall behind in any of those areas. The legislature put aside $50 million in this legislative session to help shore up some of these nonprofits. Clearly, that $50 million is not going to meet the full need. But tell us a little bit, for folks who aren't familiar, of how this is going to work. And I understand that AUW is helping to distribute some of that money as well.
Right. So, yeah, we really have to thank our local leaders and our state legislature for really stepping up to the plate. They recognized very early on that the disruptions, the pauses, the uncertainty around federal funding was going to have a huge impact on our community. And they really responded and stepped up in a big way. To our knowledge, Hawaii is the only state that has actually allocated specific funding for nonprofits who've been impacted by the federal funding uncertainty, and that's huge. There's a lot of states that are talking about it, but to our knowledge, Hawaii is the first that has actually taken such a proactive step. So that is encouraging. As you mentioned, $50 million, it is not going to be enough. However, it is truly a lifeline, and we're very grateful that our state leaders have recognized this and tried to be proactive in the approach. I wish I had more answers around how this whole process is going to work. That is still very much being discussed right now. Yes, Aloha United Way is, the bill has specifically authorized the Office of Community Services to contract with Aloha United Way, and we are already having conversations with them around how we can help get the funds out the door a little bit more quickly once it is determined how they're going to be allocated. So lots of things that we still have to determine, lots of details to be worked out, but I am very hopeful that we can partner with these government agencies to get the money out the door quickly.
Yeah, when you look at the whole grant and aid program, its history, what it's gone through in the past with the legislative session, with all these nonprofits going to the legislature, really promoting and advocating for their causes, it's hard to decide and prioritize what nonprofit gets a certain amount and what others should receive a different amount. And ultimately, some are going to be left behind and won't get this amount at all. What would be your advice maybe to those nonprofits who are going to be seeking this to make their case, to maybe highlight why they're important, and if there is a specific need that needs to be addressed out of this $50 million that the state is allocating?
Yeah, I would say that folks should, first of all, take a look at the bill. Read it, and don't be afraid to apply if they feel like this applies to them. So it is pretty broad right now, the way that it is drafted, in terms of nonprofits that can prove that they have already lost federal funding, or that they are at risk, or that the federal funding uncertainty is impacting their ability to deliver services. So I would say, even if they don't fall into one of the very specific areas, that they should not lose hope, that they should try. And then I would say, just to make their application as strong as it possibly can be in terms of really trying to size the need. And I would also say to them to, continue to look for other areas of funding, obviously. Yeah, I would just tell them to not lose hope.
Yeah.
And to try.
We had Senator Schatz on here recently, and he talked about the proposed Trump tax cuts that are going to be funded in large part by cuts to the federal budget. And we're looking at cuts to medical services and to SNAP benefits and to various programs. If that goes through, what are your concerns about the large-scale cuts, much larger than we've already seen, that could be coming to Hawaii? I mean, to the nation, but specifically how it will hurt us here in Hawaii.
Yeah, that is obviously of huge concern. And it, again, I talked about it earlier, but it puts so much pressure on the whole ecosystem because it affects funders' priorities. It affects what government is going to be able to look at. And really, when you look at the services that nonprofit is providing, they're really alleviating a lot of the burden on state government in terms of, providing the services that we need for a safe and stable and thriving community. And when when those federal funds, when there's disruption to that, it really causes instability across the whole system. And I would say that, that's one of the things that we're taking a look at, what are the ways that we can help support some of the nonprofits that are doing this work? Are there other ways that they might be able to collaborate with one another to ensure that the services that we need for our most vulnerable are going to continue?
Because of course Aloha United Way is part of a larger chapter throughout the country. It's not confined just here to Hawaii, the United Way organizations. I'm just wondering, curious, based in your role as CEO, what are the conversations like with other chapters? Because we are not alone in this. There are other states that are also looking at this. What are some of the things that you're hearing from, your counterparts, and maybe not just in the United Way chapter, but just other nonprofit CEOs that are having to look towards the future with so much uncertainty?
Yeah, it's in some ways, I guess it's heartening to know that we're not the only community that's facing this, but then, that's also kind of the stark reality of the situation that we find ourselves in, right? These conversations are happening in communities across the country. This is where, though, I will come back to that I'm so glad that we are here where we are with the leadership that we have, with the community that we have that really steps up in times of need. And I'm confident that our community will continue to be there for each other and will really figure out innovative ways that we can show up for each other and, maybe be a model for other states too that are facing similar situations.
Well, as you mentioned, we are the one and only at this point with the legislature allocating those kinds of specific resources. I'm curious, kind of following up on what Ryan was saying in terms of the specific sectors, if these cuts, go as the president hopes they do, or at least some iteration of that, what are the areas that you think Hawaii is the most vulnerable? Is it women and children? Is it homelessness? Is it domestic violence? Like what, because I know you serve you serve such a wide array of needs, but where are we sort of the most vulnerable, do you think?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? With our high cost of living, with our high cost of housing, those are the areas that are definitely hard hit. One of the things that we saw even about a week before the inauguration was that funding for domestic violence programs were cut, and kind of those dollars to support emergency housing, permanent supportive housing, were reallocated. That's really concerning. I think there was a recent article that came out about the funding cuts to Domestic Violence Action Center. We're also, of course, concerned about, the executive orders that target, LGBTQ and equity programs. Those are the kinds of things that we know are most at risk based on what the executive orders have specifically sort of targeted as being, not in line with the administration's current priorities. And so we would definitely anticipate seeing some impacts there.
You mentioned 211, and it really has become a lifeline for so many individuals in our community. And we saw the impacts of 211, especially during the pandemic. It became that immediate resource and that hotline that lawmakers were referring people to. And it became a little more branded or a little more aware in our community as we continue to go through this time with so much uncertainty. And I know you already spoke to it a little more, but I'm just wondering if you can expand upon maybe the type of calls that you're getting at 211. Is there anything that is surprising you with the questions that people are asking, or the types of people that are now making these calls to 211? Is there anything that has maybe stood out in this time frame of what you're hearing from everyday people calling 211?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. So we took a look at calls in the first quarter of 2024 and compared that to the first quarter of 2025 because we wanted to understand what the differences were. And while overall call volumes were about the same, what we saw in the patterns was that the unmet needs, and so that's again where folks are expressing a need, but there is no current program or resources available for them, that increased by 42% in the top 3 areas. Yeah. So that is a very, very concerning trend that unfortunately we anticipate we'll continue to see a rise in unmet needs. I will also say that there's a lot of kupuna that call. And often they're calling because they've heard of something about, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP benefits, and they're very concerned. What does this mean to me? And so our resource and information specialists, they spend a lot of time trying to reassure and provide the information that we do have available, right, to reassure those kupuna where they're going to be able to go to get the resources that they need.
One of the things, you mentioned how lucky we are to live here in Hawaii and how much of a community we are. There's the government side, which of course the legislature allocated that money, but there's also the community side. What do you recommend that people do? Obviously, direct donations is that's an obvious one, but beyond that, what are you asking for people to do at this time?
Yeah, so in addition to, we hope folks would consider supporting with a workplace giving campaign, or if there is a workplace giving campaign where they work, to go ahead and, to the best of their ability, support that. But we also encourage folks to volunteer. Nonprofits really could use their support. So call your favorite nonprofit or call 211 and we will connect you up with one of our nonprofit partners that's looking for volunteer support. But I think that's a really great way for the community to show their support. I would also say that, for business leaders to, really lean in and see what they can do. Call up, a nonprofit that they've supported in the past and just ask, how are you doing? What do you need? What's happening for you, and how can we be of assistance? Because that's where our strength is coming together like that.
As we sort of wrap our time up with you, I do want to just ask, as someone who has taken this role and this responsibility to lead this important organization, how have things been for you on the job here, and what makes you hopeful moving forward, looking towards the future, albeit again with somewhat uncertainty, your position in this role and your thoughts about the future of the organization?
Yeah, thanks. Well, as we said earlier, it's really an interesting time to be a nonprofit. It's pretty chaotic, it's tumultuous for nonprofits, but honestly, I feel really honored to be where I am, and I do feel like I'm where I'm meant to be in this moment. We have a fabulous team at Aloha United Way, and they're very dedicated, very mission-driven people. We have the honor of working with nonprofits every day that are doing this amazing work in community, and so it really is our honor to support them as well. And then just to see the way that community does come together and really leverages all the resources that we have available to us. I'm really very grateful for that, and look forward to other ways that we can come together and collaborate.
Well, Michelle, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for the work that you are doing with Aloha United Way. And I think we will check in with you when we have more clarity on the grants. We would love to have you back to talk about that process.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks so much.
Thank you for being here. On the other side of the break, we'll be talking to Amanda Pump from CFS. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Spotlight Now is presented by the Hawaii Tourism Authority. The Hawaii Executive Collaborative in support of rediscovering Hawaii's soul. The Hawaii Community Foundation. Hano. And by Kamehameha Schools.
Malama is to cherish and protect the reefs, the fish, the birds, the winds, and the land. Giving back, that's something that lasts generations.
Learn how you can Malama Hawaii at gohawaii.com/malama.
What is Hawaii's soul?
It's the way we exist with all living things. The aina, the ocean, the sky, the kanaka, who originated from the islands.
And everyone who calls Hawaii home.
It's all of us living with island consciousness.
It's understanding that the past is in front of us so that everyone can follow the kupuna
that came before us.
It's our shared kuleana to take care of these islands
and each other. Because we belong to Hawaii.
We are Go Hawaii.
The Hawaii Community Foundation's vision is to create an equitable and vibrant Hawaii in which all our island communities thrive. With the generous support of donors, we're working with our public, private, and nonprofit partners on our most difficult challenges. Expanding access to affordable housing, conserving freshwater resources, and the healthy development of Keiki. Mahalo for your support.
It is time to take action, and our voices matter.
Our generation will shape the future.
We are innovators and storytellers driven by purpose and rooted in culture.
Kamehameha Schools nurtures the Oiwi leader within us
to face important issues impacting our islands and Honua,
so that we can be change makers for our lahui.
Imua!
The Bigger Rewards app is here! One app gets you bigger rewards at Teddy's Bigger Burger, at Tex 808, and Tio's Burritos. Bigger rewards just for grinding. Now go ahead and tap that app.
What should we do?
I'm going to cashnetusa.com. I can apply in minutes, and if approved, we can have the money as soon as the same business day.
Go to cashnetusa.com to apply for the money you need.
Aloha and welcome back here to Spotlight Now as we continue on in our conversation with local nonprofits in our community.
Yeah, we just heard from AUW. Now we're going to hear from one of the providers, and that is Child and Family Service. Joining us now is Amanda Pump, who is the CEO of CFS. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We've had you on before, and we're so happy to have you again. Just for people who aren't familiar, what is Child and Family Service? What kind of services are you providing?
So Child and Family Service, we were birthed in Hawaii to serve our state. We only offer services here in Hawaii. We are 126 years old, and for the past 126 years we always have done the same thing, which is strengthening families and fostering the healthy development of children.
Well, over that time, you have, of course, the organization has seen many challenges and changes, and just wanted to get your thoughts on what we've been discussing so far today about some of these federal cuts and the uncertainty right now that is looming on the federal level and how that is impacting our local nonprofits. How has your organization been impacted, and how are you guys managing this time?
Oh boy. So it's such a loaded question, in part because we actually haven't identified the problem yet. So the president of our United States still hasn't approved their budget. So it's hard to kind of plan for a problem that hasn't been clearly defined yet. And I think that's been the most difficult part, is how do we get through fiscal year 26 budgets when you actually don't know how much money to rely on, you just have kind of what to expect today. For Child and Family Service, we did lose our ARPA funds. So ARPA were COVID funds that came from the federal and through the state, and it was really to help people recover, help services, offer services that the community needed to heal from the pandemic, so COVID. And so pre-COVID, Child and Family Service, we helped about 75,000 people. Last year, we helped 116,000. That number keeps going up year over year of the folks in our community that need service, all post-pandemic related. And so the loss of those ARPA funds was really challenging because it took away about $1 million of which supported our shelter, supported our families here in Hawaii, and of course our resources.
When we think about the kind of direct services you're providing, just so people kind of have an understanding of what's at stake here, how would CFS show up in community? What would people know that is coming from your organization?
Sure. So we have 51 mission-centered programs. We offer services across the state. And so we're one of the lead providers in domestic violence, child abuse and neglect, sexual assaults, youth mental health and substance abuse, all of which we consider ourselves like the life or death, imminent risk programming. And we serve across the state. And some neighbor islands like the Big Island, we are the only provider of domestic violence services. We serve about 1,500 survivors of domestic violence services a year. So we offer quite a high number of safety net programming that we make available to our community free of cost.
And with that loss of that $1 million, how are you having to already figure that out?
Oh boy. So our shelters are always our most worrisome program. And that's because we serve such a high volume of people and we don't turn anyone away. And of course, we haven't seen a lot of contractual, increases in how much money we're getting from the state. So that contract has been pretty plateaued for the last 10 years, but yet the number of people needing that service has increased year over year. So I would say, you lose $1 from that program, you're going to feel it. And so I think that is one programming area that we're watching the closest. And we know we're the only provider of shelter services on the Big Island. And so that's another. Hilo, of course, it has such saturation of needs. We're really watching those programs quite well.
When you look at what's happening, of course, nationally, as you spoke about, but also here locally, and the legislative session just ended, have you folks had conversations with lawmakers here to express the need in our community? What has been the response, and how much do you think the state can help in this time?
First of all, we want to recognize and really applaud the state for stepping up and passing SB 933, which is really going to be beneficial to nonprofits like Child and Family Service in the future. And so I do know these conversations have been ongoing. Right now we're really looking toward the state on, hey, what are your priorities for the safety net? $50 million at first glance is a lot of money, but if you look at the cost per family going through a cycle of service, we did at CFS, probably the cheapest is $1,600, and then most expensive services are community-based services, which is about $2,200, and that's a cost per cycle. So the family can be involved with us weekly for a year and have daily kind of calls from providers. So we want to keep that in mind. 50 million isn't going to go far. So it's probably, if you do the math, it's probably going to help 22,000 to 31,000 people. And we know from the True Cost Coalition about 500,000 people rely on nonprofits every year. And so if you look at it, I am worried about that number. I think, we're looking to the state to identify what is the safety net, what are our priorities moving forward, and those conversations, we are waiting to see, when they're going to happen, so we can really allocate the money and be really targeted in that allocation so we can benefit from the money to its full advantage.
As we watch what's unfolding in DC and we see these cuts happening, what are the areas that you are most concerned about? I asked this to Michelle as well. I would imagine that it falls along the same lines: houselessness, domestic violence, food insecurity. Where do you see the areas in our community that we're the most vulnerable?
So I look at, TANF and Medicaid families. Those families, they need that infrastructure in order to continue their gains, and gains looking at social determinants of health. We don't want more families falling into poverty, because then what we will see is the ripple effect afterwards. We'll see more child abuse and neglect. We'll see more domestic violence. We'll see more substance abuse. We'll see more mental health. So I do think the state is laser focused on those two areas, which I think are incredibly impactful. But you can't forget that some families need our services because it's a matter of life and death. And so if you look at most of the services we provide at Child and Family Service, these are issues like substance abuse, mental health, violence in our communities, at-risk youth. These are services like domestic violence, sexual assault. If treatment isn't made readily available, we are going to see behaviors become escalatory and really impact communities. And not just, we won't probably see it right away. It's going to be in a matter of time. And then it's going to cost the state more resources and finances to actually fix it years to come versus to allocate the money up front to keep up with the demand. So I will say, I think, yes, the state is right on track with where they should be focused, but we can't forget the critical programming that involves life or death for most of our families that we serve.
And when you look at things from a wider perspective, when you take a look at just what we've gone through as a state coming out of the pandemic, and then there was the tragedies in Maui. There were still just a lot of things that happened that many people in our community continue to suffer. With you and your organization trying to provide these services, and then now finding out that it's even going to be even more challenging because of what could potentially happen. How do you navigate that as a leader? Because I imagine it just seems like a daunting task when there continues to be so much need, and that hand that's kind of helping to provide this is potentially could be a lot less. How do you navigate that, and how do you communicate that to your board members, to your volunteers, and to your staff?
That's a great question, and one that's not easy to answer. I think we never deviate from our mission statement, right? So our mission is to strengthen families, fostering the keiki here in Hawaii. We're never going to deviate, but we are redefining to us what that safety net is going to look like. And so there's some critical programming areas like our domestic abuse shelters, which we know if we didn't exist, 99% of women and children will probably suffer, and likely there will be a lot more, homicides. And so those are critical programming areas that we're going to continue to advocate for. But we do have some programming that, if we didn't exist, it would still be very damaging for our communities, but maybe not life or death. And maybe that's some of our, general support counseling programs, our parenting education programs. Again, very important and pivotal programming, but not life or death. So as an organization sense, we always are looking at what is our most critical programs that we offer to the community. And again, what is also unique to Child and Family Service. So if another provider is providing the similar services, well, then maybe it should be capped to one provider and we do what we're good at. So not to continue to replicate over and over again the services, but really look at the unique demands and the needs of our communities.
It must be so difficult, though, when I'm hearing you speak, the idea that, you take out a parental education piece. We know that, helping parents become better parents creates better children,
Right.
creates better societies, right? Well, I mean, that's been proven again and again. That's why the state is now investing in early childhood education so much. And so when you're having to make those kinds of decisions, I'd imagine that it's incredibly difficult.
Oh, it's incredibly difficult. And again, we each get into the field because we have certain passions. And so it's hard to keep that lens, what does the community need and what do they need right now? And I think we wouldn't be good nonprofit providers if we were selfish and said, hey, the community needs this, but we're really good at this, so we want to keep doing this. We have to listen to the community. We're going to ebb and flow. You have to be adaptable. Child and Family Service, we've been doing this 126 years. So I'm sure, when World War I and World War II and the Spanish flu and women's rights kind of all came to fruition, we looked at it and we responded differently. This is another indication of that. We need to pivot and to be adaptable and to listen to our community and support where we can.
No doubt that another big part of the organization is raising funds on your own, and so we have also seen, as we mentioned in the past, what Hawaii has gone through and how dollars have been allocated to certain causes and needs. As you go back out into the community, as you continue to ask for help, but also recognizing that we could be heading into a recession, as we spoke to UHERO economist Carl Bonham saying the state looking to head into that direction. What are your thoughts about trying to maintain some of the programs that you provide based on fundraising support from local community members, and how you can continue to advocate for those dollars from individuals?
Great question. Well, first, I want to point out we're at the mercy of what the state decides to fund. And so, to say, hey, support domestic abuse shelters, but one shelter costs maybe $400,000 a year to operate, hey, that's probably not going to be likely to rely on the community to fund us and it to be sustainable. So a lot of times we're at the mercy of, hey, where is the state allocating or procuring their assets so we can provide? And of course, on the back end, we'll advocate and we'll have those conversations of where we think the need is for the community, but it's really up to the state. But on the flip side, the most important dollars that we can bring into an organization is unrestricted dollars. And so the unrestricted donations is like, hey, I trust you. I want to give you $10. You allocate that however you see fit for whatever moment you see it fitting into. And so that is so critical right now to nonprofits. And the why behind that is because when the decisions come from the federal government and from the state on what they want to fund and what we don't want to fund or cannot fund, then us nonprofit leaders, we have to look and to pivot and to use those funds to either wrap up the service or to constrict down to something more reasonable and fundable, or we have to say, hey, are nearing the end to these important programming areas, and we need some money to transition our participants to other services. So I will say, that's our most important call right now to the community is if you do give to a nonprofit, don't restrict your dollar.
And that's very important to think about. When we asked Michelle the same question, direct give is of course, paramount. That is like the most valuable thing a nonprofit can get. But what are you asking from the community beyond that? Is there a way that they can help your organization and organizations like you if they believe in what you're doing?
Absolutely. I agree with Michelle when she said call your favorite nonprofit and ask, because for every organization it might look different. And so, for Child and Family Service, we need to build our volunteer pool. And so I think that's really helpful. We're also looking at what can we constrict down at the departmental level. So again, then volunteers that come with skills that could actually help us operationalize becomes in hand, or help us, implement a new software or technology, because most of our human capital will be serving the community. And so operationally, if we can become more efficient, it'll be less costly for us, and then we can execute more of our resources back to the community. I also ask the community, hey, it's time to step up and to help your neighbors and to serve with Aloha, because our neighborhoods, our communities is gonna need you more than ever. And so we cannot do what we do alone. There's some amazing role models out there. There's some amazing community members out there. Folks might need childcare. They might need help. They might need support. Step up and help one another. And, I think we're going to get through this. So the last thing I ask our community is patience. We are overly saturated with the need right now. It's going to get worse, but we're going to have less resources and funding to help the need. So it doesn't mean nonprofits are not impactful. It just means, hey, right now, some of us might not survive this. Some of us might be only able to serve certain, communities or certain level of services. So please be patient with us and know that most of our nonprofits, if not all, are there to help their communities, and we're doing the best that we can.
I think that's a really important way to end. Thank you so much, Amanda.
Thanks for having me.
Just really, putting it all into perspective, and, some tough choices ahead, but it really does sound like you are pulling through in a really beautiful way. So
Absolutely.
Thank you. Good to have you. Thank you. Amy Miller joins us from the Food Bank right after this. Stay with us.
From the moment you wake up,
Hawaii News Now brings you the stories that impact your day.
With more on the breaking news, we go live to Casey Lund.
Ready with the push alert? I'm going live. We have an update to the breaking news we brought you this morning on Sunrise.
Okay, guys, as soon as this wraps, toss to Mahia.
And we've been covering this story all day.
Now we go live to Mahia for a new development.
Stand by for breaking news. They just captured the suspect.
That's confirmed?
Yes, sources just confirmed it.
The news you need the moment it breaks.
Here on Hawaii News Now.
First alert traffic is like always having a helpful passenger right next to you.
There's a crash up ahead in the left lane.
When we see a backup, we'll tell you live on TV.
That doesn't look too good.
And send an alert to your phone.
I'll type, you drive.
First alert traffic on TV, streaming, and on the Hawaii News Now app.
Keeping you and your ohana safe.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suchi. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders. And taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, thanks again for staying tuned here to Spotlight Now as we continue on in our conversation, really talking to the important people in our community, the nonprofits that do so much for our community to help people in need. And we continue on with another important nonprofit.
Yeah, and we are talking to Amy Miller from the Hawaii Foodbank. And, Amy, just in hearing our conversation, just that last note that Amanda left us on, this idea that nonprofits are going to be doing their best, but there might be some cutbacks. Tell us about what you've been experiencing so far in light of the federal changes.
Sure. So at Hawaii Foodbank, we work with about 225 partner agencies that are working every day to get food into community. One of the most important means of food that we bring into community and distribute is directly through the USDA. And earlier this spring, we learned that about $4 million worth of food that had been coming into the state last year we won't have access to it this year. So we are looking at a deficit statewide about $4 million in terms of food. And this was like proteins, expensive food, frozen chicken, frozen pork, foods that are really highly prized that oftentimes we can't afford to purchase ourselves.
And what was the reason given for that cut?
So, we didn't really get a reason. I think it's all just part of cutbacks that are happening across the board. So we're really scrambling at this point to see how we can replace those foods.
And so how much of an impact has all of this already had on the organization? Because it seems that there's often call-outs that the food bank will make during certain times of years when things are running a little bit low. I can imagine now that things have ramped up considerably, knowing that you're also getting these cuts to dollars, not only just people donating canned goods, but actual dollars for the organization as well.
Yeah, so the loads that we expected to come in stopped around April or so. So we actually did see a real dip in our inventory. So we've had to respond, purchasing additional food. So this is where, community has been really helpful, helping to donate, helping to provide food, and really looking to the community, to philanthropy, looking to our partners at the state, at the counties to see, we have to make sure nobody goes hungry. I think that's really, we live in a place where people do take care of each other, where we really believe that no one should go to bed hungry on our island. So that's a commitment I think that we have collectively made to community as Hawaii Foodbank, but really something I think that we all share. So what do we do together? And I think that's really what we're focused on right now.
Give us a sense of how food insecure we are. I mean, when you think about people going hungry or having to make sacrifices in food, where are we as a state?
We are not in a good place, and that is before any of these cuts that we're contemplating right now. About 1 in 3 households in Hawaii are food insecure. That means there's not enough food in that household for everybody to live a healthy, active lifestyle. About 1 in 10 households are going without eating for whole days at a time. 6% of our kids are going without eating for whole days at a time. So this is a very serious issue. It's a moral issue, and it's also, frankly, a public health issue, right? We know that food insecurity is so highly correlated to these really negative health outcomes. Our kids aren't doing as well in school because they're hungry. So this is the level that we were already facing prior to any of these changes. So I think one of the things we're really concerned about is looking at the potential cuts in safety net programs, that those food insecurity rates are just going to skyrocket.
What other specific things are you looking for or information on from Washington? Is there anything else that could also be coming that you're getting, any word on, or any warning signs that could be even more detrimental to the organization?
Yeah, so about 20% of our funding comes through our federal dollars. Much of that comes through the USDA. So we're really keeping a close eye. The program I mentioned earlier was the Emergency Food Assistance Program. So really hoping that we don't see additional cuts to that program. We also have a senior food box program. We just learned that we had about a 15% cut back in our service numbers. So that's going to be difficult for us to figure out what to do. We already had a waiting list of about 500 seniors. So we'd been serving about 2,300 seniors with a 500 person waiting list. Now our caseload just dropped to 2,000. So we're going to need to kind of, again, do more with less. And then the last pieces that we're just really focusing on is what happens with SNAP. So SNAP is one of our biggest anti-hunger tools. For every food that's distributed by the food banks, I think 9 meals. Every meal that is distributed by a food bank in this country, 9 meals are distributed through SNAP. So it works. It's always been something that the federal government has totally supported, and now they're contemplating up to $300 billion cut in this program that could mean really devastating impacts across the country and for people right here in Hawaii.
Yeah, when you think about those kinds of cuts, it's really hard to, kind of get your mind around those kinds of numbers. What do you expect, like when you're talking to lawmakers or to people who are in a position of power and who might be able to make a difference, what do you tell them about what could happen to community without those benefits?
So I think our biggest concern is that, and so just focusing on SNAP, for instance, the more people that fall out of SNAP no longer qualify for SNAP, or maybe because additional costs were shifted to the states might need to cut back. So I think our first hope is that really the state, we can do everything we can to protect those that are on those benefits today, because we already see what happens when folks might run out of SNAP benefits before the end of the month. We know that people will take all kinds of sacrifices in order to put food on the table for their families. So folks will max out their credit cards. They will go without food themselves so their kids can have food. They will skip going to the doctors. They'll skip paying for prescription drugs. They will need to make these really critical decisions. Do I put gas in the car so I can go to work, or do I put food on the table for my family? Can I pay my electricity bill? And food oftentimes is the thing that just gets squished because you can't pay only half of your rent, but you can spend less money on food. So people will first pivot towards less healthy food items. And then when things get really tough, they turn, and that's exactly why we're here at the Food Bank and our partners. We want to make sure no one has to make those impossible choices. But I think the real concern is that we've already seen significant increases. Right now, we are serving almost as many families as we were at the height of the pandemic. We're serving about twice as many families as we did prior to the pandemic. So serving about 173,000 people on average per month. And the numbers keep on ticking up, and that is before anything else happens. So the food banks, the safety net, the charitable food system, we're gonna need help in order to meet the need that we see coming.
When you look at what the state is doing with this $50 million that they are allocating specifically to help with this grant and aid process, and to help nonprofits, what would be your case to lawmakers? What would be your wish list? What would you be asking for in order to see some of these services maintained?
So, I really feel like this is a time where we can come together as a community and come together as a state. So really to hopefully see our nonprofit sector working collaboratively, and seem like where can we partner, where can we find efficiencies for us, the food banks across the state. Again, this one program alone cut about $4 million worth of food. So I think our hope would be, could we replace that? One nice thing about the food banks too is we can really stretch a dollar. So we did a little study last year and found that on average, our dollar goes about 5 times as far as any of us would do at the store. And it makes sense because we're buying at the container load. We have these wonderful relationships with food banks on the continent and farmers. So we're able to really source healthy good food at a really, really low cost so that who can we partner with to help, again, stretch that dollar and do the most we can to make sure people get access to safe and healthy food.
You mentioned that you're serving as many people as you did during the height of the pandemic. I believe you said 173,000 people every month, which is pretty staggering. I'm curious to know who that was one of the things during COVID that people found surprising is I'm seeing a really nice car in line at Aloha Stadium. That surprises me. And what would you say is sort of the profile of the clients that you're serving, and what are the demographics that you're seeing, and do they differ maybe from a year or two ago?
So we are really seeing more and more folks show up who have never had to ask for help before. It's pretty interesting. When we first started to see the numbers start to tick back up, initially we thought, well, maybe these are people who needed help during COVID and they got back up on their feet and then something happened, but they knew they had this resource. So we start having conversation, and the interesting thing is these are our Alice families. These are families who are working 1, 2, sometimes 3 jobs, mostly make too much money to qualify for assistance. 2/3 of the people we serve do not receive benefits of any kind. So this is just, I think it really is an expression of the cost of living in Hawaii. We know the cost of food has gone up more than 30% at home since prior to the pandemic. So it's just really hard for folks to make ends meet. And that's why we're here. So really hoping that people don't feel embarrassed. There is no stigma attached. If you need help, that's why we're here. You shouldn't have to make these terrible choices. But just seeing people needing to do that for the first time, it's hard.
And if you can give us an update on where things are at with just your overall inventory on shelves, with just the day-to-day of supplying these types of food and resources to people in the community. How are things looking on that front, and how do you maintain stocking those shelves through donations and anything else that you may want people to be aware of where things stand right now with the overall inventory of what you have?
Sure. So we're in pretty decent shape right now. We usually have anywhere between 1 and 1.5 million pounds of food in our warehouse at any given time. That lasts us about 3 weeks, just with our regular distribution channels. And so And we have a 2-person team that focuses 100% on procurement. So they're working with donors, they're working with buyers, they're working with farmers. So they're always just trying to see, okay, what will it take to be sure that we have food to meet the demand? Because we feel that's really our promise. It's our commitment that we've made to our agencies. It's our commitment that we've made to our community. We want to be there so that everyone can have access to food.
You know, Amanda said that her number one ask, of course, is unrestricted dollars. And I would imagine it would be the same for your organization. If you can make my one to turn into 5, I shouldn't give you my food. I should give you my cash, right?
Yes, for sure.
But what are you asking for from community? How can community help?
So, I mean, similar to probably what you heard from Amanda, funding, that's really the most efficient way. I know sometimes it doesn't feel quite as tangible as, you know, going to the store and buying food and bringing it down, but because we can really stretch that dollar, it's a really efficient way to give. So every dollar that's donated to the food bank, we can turn that into more than 2 meals. So that's a really wonderful way.
$1.
$1, yes. So we can, again, we can really stretch that. We can stretch that dollar. And then volunteering, we always have opportunity to volunteer. And then the last thing I would say, you know, if you're not in a position to give, but you want to volunteer, you should do that. And if you need help, don't be ashamed. You know, come to our website. There's a place you can go, click to get help, and we can connect you with one of our partners so that you can get access to food. So that's the last thing I think I would just really ask, like, this is something you've been contemplating and you're concerned about being able to put a meal on the table for your family. That shouldn't be something you have to worry about.
You know, as we have been talking to these, you know, various nonprofits here today, and just getting a sense of where things are at, oftentimes it becomes difficult to remain hopeful during this time, especially when there is a lot of uncertainty. You just don't know what's going to get cut and what's not. How are you planning for the future of this organization when you don't know what your budget may look like, where you don't know about a lot of these important variables? How do you plan for that, knowing that things need to be done and you have to have some sort of action plan moving forward?
That's a great question. It's where probably all nonprofits are right now. Most of us run on a July 1st fiscal year. So we are right in the throes of finishing up our budget. And I'll say, like, again, our commitment is to at least maintain service. So that's, I think, our first thing that we're focusing on. To the extent, you know, sometimes there are maybe food items that are more expensive that we might not be able to afford to purchase. We're committed to always providing healthy foods, but we may look to shift a little bit at the mix so there might be more. For instance, produce is actually quite inexpensive for us to procure from the continent. Maybe we need to cut back on our local food purchase. I mean, there are things like that we don't want to do, but that we, again, it all comes back to our commitment to the people that we're serving. So that's our number one commitment. So we'll do everything we can to be there.
And picking up, you know, what Ryan said about hope, what keeps you hopeful in this time?
You know, I love working at the food bank. It's just such an amazing place to be because people help each other out every day, you know, and we get to be this little part of that, just connection. Food is just something that I think so important. It's more than sustenance, right? It's something that brings us together. It's how we share culture. It's how we show each other that we love each other. So to be able to be a part of that and see so many people, we have thousands of volunteers that out of the goodness of their heart, they want to help their neighbor. They want to help their kupuna. They're there for each other in this just really like special and meaningful way. And we get to be a little part of that. So anytime it gets down, oh my gosh, you know, we worry a little bit about all the things that are happening. To be able to go see some of our agency partners and knowing what kind of difference they're making in the lives of their neighbors is really meaningful.
Yeah, and before I let you go, I do want to ask you about the need across the state. I know that you service folks here on Oahu and also on Kauai, but you have partners on the other islands. Do any other islands stand out to you? Like, is there more need on one versus another?
You know, the rates across the state are quite high. The Hawaii Island, we actually have 40% of our Hawaii Island residents are food insecure. So that's, the highest levels in the state. So that's our partners at the Food Basket on Hawaii Island are working really hard. Partners on Maui Food Bank seen a huge increase in need for those who are affected by the fires. So it is something that all of the food banks are really looking at quite closely.
And I'm just wondering, you know, as we talk to lawmakers and there's talk of this special session, do you think that nonprofits would come and go to the legislature and say 50 million is not enough. We may need more. Is that something that you could see nonprofits advocating for more money? I mean, as we all heard, everyone's very appreciative of it, but it sounds like that might not be enough.
You know, this is a very unusual time, right? I think that this is a crisis, and we're about to see more. And here in Hawaii, we take care of each other. So what does that mean, right? How we don't have a system where everyone relies on government or everyone relies on nonprofit. It's a partnership between all these different organizations that really work together to maintain that safety net. So yeah, I mean, I think we need to understand what the true gaps might look like, and then how do we come together to fill those needs, and it might be more money. And my sincere hope is that we'll figure it out, right? That we'll come together and make sure that everyone has what they need.
So much uncertainty, but I have a lot of confidence in the leaders that we spoke to, including you today. So thank you so much, Amy. It was really good to hear from you. Thanks for all that
having
you're
me.
doing. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this. Spotlight Now continues.
From the moment you wake up.
Hawaii News Now brings you the stories that impact your day.
With more on the breaking news, we go live to Casey Lund.
Ready with the push alert? I'm going live.
We have an update to the breaking news we brought you this morning on Sunrise.
Okay, guys, as soon as this wraps, toss to Mahia.
And we've been covering this story all day.
Now we go live to Mahia for a new development.
Stand by for breaking news. They just captured the suspect.
That's confirmed?
Yes, sources just confirmed it.
The news you need the moment it breaks.
Here on Hawaii News Now.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suchi. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders. And taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, important conversation that we had today about the impacts that the federal cuts could have on Hawaii nonprofits. And we heard from various nonprofits here represented, and you really get a sense of the despair and really uncertainty that exists within these various organizations.
Yeah, I mean, you heard from Amanda Pump at CFS. They've lost $1 million already. The Foodbank losing $4 million already, and that is before the tax plan has passed. We don't know what that's going to mean, but it could mean billions of dollars cut from various programs, and that, of course, will trickle down to the states. In the meantime, you know, you heard from Michelle Bartel at AUW about that $50 million that the state has put aside that they're going to help to distribute. Not quite clear on what that process will be, but at least that will be a lifeline for some.
Yeah, and really taking a book out of how things were done with the grant and aid process of the past, with nonprofits having to go and really make their case. And it's going to be hard for those lawmakers who are in charge of that to really decide who gets money, because at the end of the day, 50 million, as we heard from these nonprofits, they're grateful for that, but it just might not be enough with the growing need. And again, a lot of uncertainty continues to be felt out there as they await to see what other cuts may be coming from the Trump administration.
This is an issue we will be following closely. Coming up next week, we key into transportation with Lori Kahikina.
Yeah, getting an update on how things are going with HART as the rail continues to make its way into town and impacting more drivers here in Honolulu. So it's always great to get an update from Lori Kahikina and the team over there at HART. We thank you for joining us. We'll see you right back here next week, Tuesday.
Aloha.